Data protection is one of the most overlooked parts of most small business IT strategies. But why? Because if you use Microsoft 365, you already have all of the data protection tools at your disposal. And one of these tools is called sensitivity labels. So why aren't businesses using them? Well, that is the topic for today's video. But before we start, just a quick intro. My name is Jonathan Edwards, also known as the Bearded 365 Guy. I help businesses all over the world with the Microsoft 365. So why don't you check me out at bearded365guy.com. Now, there's lots of information in blogs and on social media about things like protecting users with tools like multi-factor authentication and protecting devices with things like antivirus software. And what about protecting email with anti-spam and anti-malware? However, lots of businesses aren't protecting their most important asset, and that is their data. Now, the great news is, if you're using Microsoft 365, you already have all the data protection tools at your disposal. And one of these tools is called sensitivity labels. Now, I very rarely see businesses using this. But with sensitivity labels, you can create kind of virtual labels, and you can apply those to files, emails, and even entire SharePoint sites. Now, to help you understand what a sensitivity label is, let's look at a couple of examples. One day, you create a couple of Word documents. Now, let's talk about the first Word document. It contains a chocolate brownie recipe that you plan to make at the weekend. Plus, when you've made it, you might even publish it on your personal blog. Now, when it comes to privacy and security, you're not really interested. If this chocolate brownie recipe gets into the wrong hands, it's not a problem. It's just a recipe after all. Plus, you actually want to promote it. Now, the second document that you create is a bit more serious, and it's aimed towards your management team. It's a list of all the people that you plan to make redundant in the next 6 months. Now, these are both Word documents, but obviously they need to be treated entirely differently. So with a chocolate brownie recipe, why don't you attach a virtual label, a sensitivity label called public? Now, you're not bothered if this chocolate brownie recipe becomes in the public domain. You don't want to attach any security to it. There's nothing sensitive. But for your second document, you do want security. So why don't we attach a sensitivity label called management team only? This sensitivity label will ensure that your Word document is encrypted and can only be seen by members of the management team. Plus, we can put a watermark on that Word document saying highly confidential. Plus, we can do other things, like we can make that document expire after a certain number of days. Really fancy, yeah? Sensitivity labels take your business data protection to a whole new level. Let's look at another example with email. You might write an email to someone, but you don't want that person to be able to print that email, forward it to anyone else, or copy the contents. Well, you can achieve all of that by applying a sensitivity label to that email. Now, as I've said earlier in this video, I don't see too many businesses using sensitivity labels. And the businesses that I do see using these labels made the same two mistakes. Firstly, they create too many sensitivity labels. That means when people are trying to label their documents or their emails, there's just too many labels to choose from and they get overwhelmed. And secondly, the naming convention of these sensitivity labels can sometimes be too confusing. And again, people get overwhelmed. And when people don't understand technology, they just don't embrace it. So what I'm going to show you in today's video are 5 sensitivity labels that every business should implement and start using today. Now, obviously, every business is different. So for a lot of businesses, these labels might just be a starting point. Now, I've taken a few influences here. I've looked at the traffic light protocol, which means that we color code our sensitivity labels so they make sense to the users. And when it comes to naming, I've got some great names from a guy who has a blog called IT Pro Mentor. They are the best names that I have seen. So without further ado, let me jump onto that computer behind me and let's have this demo. Okay, I am logged into the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. This is just a test tenant. I've just got a handful of users in here. I'm going to go down to Admin Centers and Compliance. Once that loads, I'm just going to go down to Solutions and I want Information Protection and Labels. And simply, I want to start creating labels. So let's create a label. So firstly, we need to name it. So this first label is going to be called Public. So people will apply this label for documents and data that they don't mind getting in the public domain. So maybe some examples of this, they could be brochures on your services. So we get that a lot. People say, look, can I have a brochure on the services you offer? So you could have a sensitivity label called Public. There could be recipes, there could be blogs, anything that you don't mind getting in the public domain. The display name is going to be the same. We've also got a label priority, which we're going to come back to a little bit later. And then we need a description of this label to help people understand what it is. So I'll put that in now. No private information. The information can be shared publicly. Optionally as well, you can put a description for your admins, the people who are administering your Microsoft 365. I'll leave that blank. And at the bottom here, we can choose a label color. Now, following the traffic light protocol, the public label is clear, so we don't need a label color. Click on Next. And then we need to define the scope. So I want this label to be available for files, that's Word, Excel, PowerPoint and things. The label available for emails and also groups and sites, SharePoint sites and things like that. So I'll leave these as they are and I'll click on Next. Now, because this label is a public label, I'm not bothered about controlling access and I don't want to apply any kind of content marking. So I'll leave these as they are and I'll click on Next. Now, there's a feature called auto labeling, a little bit out of the scope of this video, so I'm going to leave that switched off and click on Next. And then we need to define some protection settings for groups and sites, so things like SharePoint sites. So let me check these two boxes here. This is about the privacy of the site and external sharing. Click on Next. Now again, this is a public label. So in terms of privacy, I want to leave this set as public. Anybody can see it if they want to. And on here, I'm going to let Microsoft 365 group owners add people outside of the organization because again, it's all public data. I'm quite happy for it to be in the public domain. On Next, what about external sharing? So again, anyone can share this data with anyone. I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to leave this conditional access box unchecked in this example. I'll click on Next. And then I'm going to click on Create Label. Okay, the label has been created. I can publish this straight away, but at the moment, I'm not going to publish it until I've created my other labels. I'm going to click on Done, and my label is there. So let's create a new label. So the name for this new label is going to be General. So what's this for? Well, a general label is just general data. You can share it internally with people inside your organization and perhaps with trusted external parties as well. It's not quite as shareable, if you like, as a public label. It is just general data. So there might be an element of sensitivity about it, but not overly. The display name is going to be the same. Again, I'm going to leave the label priority, and then we need a description of this label for users. So this information can be shared internally and with trusted partners, but it's not for general viewing, okay? Description for admins, I'll leave this as blank. This time, I'm going to give this label a color. I'm going to choose green for this one. Click on Next. Again, we want to choose files, emails, groups, and sites once again. And once again, for this, we're not going to control access again, and we're not going to apply any content marking, okay? So what you might think, well, what's the difference between the public and the general when it comes to these two things? A big difference here will come in the groups and sites. But as well, we are getting people used to classifying data to what it actually is. So sometimes the differences between the labels are quite subtle, but we need to get our users used to classifying data. Again, we'll leave this off. We've got some groups and sites, so we'll select these again, click on Next. On the privacy here, we're going to select this one to none. So it's team and group members can set the privacy settings themselves. And again, we'll select this box here. And we'll click on Next. Again, I'll select this box here. Bit different, it's not anyone anymore, so it's new and existing guests. And we'll click on Next, and we'll create that label as well. Again, don't create a policy yet, and click on Done. And that label has now appeared. Okay, we're going to create another label, but this one we're going to start getting a bit more confidential now. So we'll call this a name. So this is called confidential external. So people will use this label when they want to share sensitive information, so sensitive files, folders, emails, and this information might be for people inside or outside of the organization, specifically outside. The display name is going to be the same. And then let's have a description again for the users. So that's sensitive information intended for specific people inside or outside the organization. Again, we're now going to give this a color, and this one's going to be amber. So following on from the traffic light protocol, amber, it's a little bit cautious, isn't it? So we're starting to deal with sensitive information. Click on next. Again, we're going to apply this to all the items and the groups and sites. Click on next. But this time, we're going to check these boxes because we want to control access, and we're going to apply some content marking. Click on next. So this is the first time we've seen this screen here. It's the access control. It's about encrypting data. So I want to configure access control settings, and then I've got this box here. So we can assign permissions now. So all data with this label will have these permissions that we're defining, or we can let our users assign permissions when they apply the label. Now, I don't think you're going to want to let users assign the permissions because they might not know what they're doing. So we're going to assign the permissions now. So user access to content expires. So this is a useful setting. The default is never. We can choose a specific date, or we can look at a number of days after the label is applied. And this means the content just expires and it won't be available to view, whether that's an email, a Word document, whatever. So you can set that. I'm going to leave this to never. We've then got another option which is slightly different, which is to allow offline access. So someone has a Word document that you've applied this label to. They download it and it's on their local device. Now, if we set this to something like 30 days, then after 30 days, that user will not be able to open that document, even though they've downloaded it. So that's a really useful feature. And for this label itself, which is confidential external, I am going to set this offline access to 30 days because I think that's a useful security feature to add. Then we've got to assign permissions. So what specific people can interact with this label. So we'll assign permissions. Because this is for internal and external people, I'm going to go for add any authenticated users. If you click on the information here, you can see what an authenticated user is. So it's an email account that's been authenticated by Entra or is authenticated by a Microsoft account. Okay, so I'll leave that as that. And then we can look at some permissions later on. But essentially, if I go on to choose permissions, whoever has hold of this data can do all of these things. They can print it, they can reply, they can forward, they can do all of these things. We'll leave that as it is for now. Click on save there. And then click on next. And then we're going to add some content marking, okay? So we can add a footer, we can add a header, or we can add a watermark over it. What I might do here is add, let's say, a header, and I will say, I've just repeated the label itself, and that will appear as a header on all the data. Click on save, click on next. We're not going to auto label, next. Okay, let's look at privacy of groups and sites and external sharing. So again, this isn't going to be public. This is definitely going to be private. And we're also going to let Microsoft 365 group owners add people if they need to. Click on next. Again, let's talk about external sharing. It is going to be new and existing guests. Click on next. And let's create that label. Again, don't create. Click on done. Okay, let's add a next one. I'm going to call this confidential internal. Okay, as the name suggests, this is confidential information that should not be shared outside of the organization. So this could apply to my redundancy document that we were talking about earlier, or anything that just needs to stay internally. Display name is the same, and a description for users could be here. So sensitive information for people within the organization. We're going to color this as orange like that. Click on next. Again, we're going to define this scope for all the items and the group and sites. Click on next. We're definitely going to want to control access and apply some marking. Click on next. Again, these settings, I'm going to choose never for this. I am going to allow some 30 days of offline access. Now how this differs here, we're going to assign permissions, but it's just all users and groups within this organization, okay? So not externally at all. We're going to click on next. We'll have some content marking again. Again, we'll choose a header and we'll customize that text. And it's just showing people that it's confidential and internal. Click on next. Click on next here. No auto labeling. Again, we'll talk about privacy. We'll talk about external sharing. Click on next. Okay, privacy. This is obviously private. We're not going to do any external access here, so no one can be invited. Click on next. Control external sharing. And this here is going to be only people in your organization. Okay. Now we've also got another checkbox here that you might want to use, and you can use a conditional access policy. So basically you can block access to SharePoint sites for any device that isn't managed. Now this is really useful if you're looking at a confidential internal label. So any SharePoint site that has this label applied, if you try to access that site from a device that isn't managed in your Intune, you can set it so you can block access completely or only allow web access. So again, I'm not going to go through the creation of this SharePoint, this conditional access policy in this video, but that is a good wraparound for this label. Okay, click on next and we'll create that label. We're not going to publish it yet, so we'll click on that and click on done. Okay, let's get into the final label. We're going to call this. This is called confidential view only. So what is this for? Well, this label you would use if you want to communicate some information to a person or a set of people, but you don't want them to do anything with it. You don't want them to spread it. So if I sent an email to someone with confidential information, I might not want that person to print that email or copy data from it or forward that email. And I can do exactly that with this sensitivity label. So it's confidential information that the person can just view. Display name is the same. And then we'll have a description. Go down here, and this time we're going to choose this darkest color here. Okay, click on next. On the scope of this label, I'm not going to choose groups and sites because it's view only. Okay, so it's just for files and emails. Click on next. Control access, apply content marking. Click on next. Okay, on here, we're going to leave these the same as previously. 30 days offline access, good idea. Now let's assign some permissions. So this label is for internal and external groups. So we're going to choose any authenticated again. But this time, we're going to choose the permissions. What can they do with this data? So rather than co-author, which includes all this, I'm going to go down to custom. And I'm going to choose the permissions that I want these users to be able to do. What can they do with this data? So I want them to be able to view it, the view rights, the view content. They can reply to it. They can reply to all. We can allow macros. But crucially, what we're not including is they can't edit it, they can't save it, they can't print it, they can't copy it, they can't forward it, they can't do any of these things. It really is viewing only. Click on save. Click on save again. And then click on next. We want to mark it up. Okay, the header here. Again, we're just going to choose the same. Click on save. Click on next. Again, I've not used groups and sites, so all these are grayed out. Click on next. And then click on create label. Don't create a policy yet. And click on done. So now we've got our labels in place. Let's go to label policies. We want to publish these labels. So choose which labels we want to publish. We're going to select them all. Click on add. Click on next. Click on next here. We're going to publish this to all users and groups. Click on next. And now we've got some interesting settings here. So users can remove labels, they can lower its classification. So when we say lower its classification, someone, for example, could say this is labeled as general, but really it could be public. Okay. So in this instance, the user has to provide a justification of why they are lowering its classification. And that justification will be logged so you can see why they've done it. So that's a really good feature to have on. This next section can be a bit controversial. Require users to apply a label to their emails and documents. So whatever they do, if they create a Word document or an Excel document or send an email, they are required to apply a label. So if you don't have that requirement, in my opinion, people just won't use the labels. And the whole point of this is that all your data is classified moving forward. So I like to make it a requirement that users apply a label. Okay, we'll leave these as they are. We'll click on next. And then we can have some default labels. Okay, if you're making a requirement, then you might want to say, well, the standard is everything is general unless someone chooses something else. That's a good idea. The same with that. We can just leave that as the same as document. Now, this is a useful feature as well. So I send an email and the label policy is general, but I have an attachment with that email that is confidential view only. So which one has precedence? So I think the email should inherit the priority from the attachment. I think that's a good setting. And we can choose that section as well. Click on next. We're talking about meetings here, but we're not going to talk about that in today's video. We can have a default label as well for sites. So we could have that as general if we want to. And we can make it a requirement that people apply a label to groups or sites. Click on next. We've got the Fabric and the Power BI. We'll choose anything there. And then the name of the policy. So you can call it what you want and you can have the description. Remember, you can have multiple policies. Okay, this is just a basic policy set to get you started. And then click on submit. Okay, that's been created. As it says, it can take up to 24 hours to publish the labels to their apps. So now it's just a case of waiting. Okay, I've waited just a couple of hours. I'm now logged into Fred Finance's Microsoft 365 portal, as you can see here, just a fictitious account. I've gone down to Microsoft Word, and I'm going to launch a blank document just to show you a few things. Okay, so this is just a blank Word document that I've created from scratch. The first thing, the top left-hand corner, you can see a green shield here. And if I just click on the drop down here, you can see that the sensitivity label is general. Now, if you remember during configuration, we set the default sensitivity label for documents to be general, and that's why that has appeared here. I've also got the description of the label, which we put in again during the configuration. Now, if I just type anything in here, what I've also now got in Word is this sensitivity tab here. So at the moment, this is general. Now, if I wanted to say, well, actually, I want the label of this document to be public, I get this pop up here. Now, again, if you remember during configuration, we said we want a justification for when people want to lower the label. So we've got a few options in there. Now, if I just close out of that, and I'll close out of that here, there's a couple of documents that I created earlier. Firstly, I've got one called Redundant People. And secondly, I've got a chocolate brownie recipe. Okay, so let's look at these here. So my chocolate brownie recipe has got a clear shield. So if I click on the drop down, this has got a public sensitivity label. Again, there's a description there. If I go into the Redundant People document, you can see that this has got a padlock and an orange label. And again, this is confidential internal. So this information can only really be shared with internal people. And again, that has got the header of confidential internal. That was automatically applied. Again, we did it during configuration. So let's now do a few tests with these documents. Firstly, let me go to the share here, and I'm going to copy the link of this file. I'll set it to anyone, and then click on apply. So I've got the link. And then I'm going to go into the email, and I'll create a new email. Now I'm going to send it to Jonathan Edwards. And I will copy that folder in here. And I'll put a subject of private information. So what I'm doing here is I am sharing a document that has an internal sensitivity label with an external user. That is me, okay? I will send that. Next, I'm going to go and share the chocolate brownie recipe. So if I go to share there, if I copy the link, again, I'm going to share it with anyone. Click on apply. I've got that link. And I will send a new email to Jonathan. Again, it's going external. So what I'm sharing here is a document with the public sensitivity label externally. Okay, I'll send that. And then I'm going to show you one last thing. So new email here. Again, I'm sending it to Jonathan. Okay, for your eyes only. Now in Outlook, you can see I've also got a sensitivity tab. So what I'm going to apply to this is confidential view only. Now, if you remember, with this label, we can share information internally or externally, but we've really restricted permissions. So I will send that one as well. So I've sent 3 emails. Let's hop over to my Integral IT email and we'll see what happens. Okay, so over to my email, and I've received the 3 emails from Fred Finance. Firstly, the chocolate brownie recipe. Okay, let's launch this and see what happens. Well, it opens. There's no problem there. That public sensitivity label, the SharePoint settings was allowed sharing with anyone, and that has opened without a problem. Okay, but what about this other email that actually Fred shouldn't have really shared because it had a sensitivity label of confidential internal? Okay, I'll try and launch that one. And you can see it says, sorry, but you don't have the permission to open this document. This document is protected by a rights management service. So that sensitivity label has absolutely done its job there. Okay, the final thing I want to show is this email here. You can see that it's encrypted. It's got a padlock there. Let's open it up for your eyes only. Right, on the screen at the moment where the email is opened, you will not see the email at all. You will just see a blank box. Now, that's the sensitivity label. It means that I can't record the information. Now, what I can actually see on the screen, I can see the email, I can see the information, but I'm unable to do anything with it. I can't forward, I can't share to Teams, I can't print, I can't do anything. But you will not see that, unfortunately, on the video. But I guess that is the best example of how these sensitivity labels work. These are for viewing only. We can't copy or anything else. So that is sensitivity labels in a nutshell. So there you have it, sensitivity labels in Microsoft 365. They are 5 labels that you can implement in your business and improve your data protection today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Look forward to seeing you soon.